Greetings, this is Tammy Kirkland with the World Class Teaching Program. We are going to discuss the standards and the 5 core propositions in this presentation. And I will tell you, this is probably the single most important presentation in this entire training. So grab a pencil and some paper and get ready to take notes and learn the secrets to success in achieving National Board certification. The goal is to help you develop an understanding of how significant the 5 core propositions and standards are to certification. Learn ways and activities to interact with the 5 core propositions and to get familiar with your standards. Now, once you go through the training for the components, there will be a final presentation called Achieve. That presentation will teach you how to actually embody and embed the standards in your teaching. This presentation is just going to make you aware of the 5 core propositions and their standards and explain what they are and why they are so significant to National Board certification, and to come up with ways to get you familiar with your 5 core props and the standards. First off, let's begin by looking at this. This is just a chart that shows you how everything is connected. You can see the 5 core propositions are in red. They're considered the big ideals of National Board certification. Your standards, your rubrics, and your commentary questions all relate back to and are anchored from the 5 core propositions. Once you receive a score report from the National Board, you will receive feedback statements. And those feedback statements are also anchored to the 5 core propositions. Often people make the mistake of overlooking the 5 core propositions, and we're going to try and prevent that now, because your components are actually scored against your standards and the 5 core propositions. And it's very important to know how your components will be scored prior to beginning your components. So how are they scored? Understand this: the reason for National Board certification before you begin your certification journey. So what is National Boards all about? What is the reason for National Boards? And that is to improve the quality of teaching and get you to the point to where you teach and model accomplished teaching. And the standards and the 5 core propositions serve as the model of what you are working to achieve. And here it just shows you a little bit that the National Board certification is anchored in the candidate's knowledge and ability to demonstrate the 5 core propositions and the standards. And again, we call this demonstration accomplished teaching in the National Board certification journey. So what does the National Board say about scoring? This comes directly from the scoring guide. So what I mean by this is, well, what do they actually say about how you are going to be scored? We know all the components have a rubric, but let's look at this. There is a document and a website for what teachers should know and be able to do, and I'll show you just a moment. It is the essence of the 5 core propositions. The National Board standards and the assessments, did you hear that? And the assessments. That includes the assessment center as well as what you submit for components 2, 3, and 4 of all certificate areas, are founded on the following 5 core propositions. So here are the big ideas, the 5 core propositions that you are expected to demonstrate throughout your commentaries. Teachers are committed to students and their learning. Teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those subjects to students. Teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring student learning, and teachers think systematically about their practices and learn from experience. Teachers are members of learning communities. Now, those are very broad and very general, and I'm sure as I said them, you immediately thought of a definition and what that looks like to you. But what we want you to do is become familiar with how the National Board defines each one of these propositions in regard to what accomplished teaching is. There's a website for that, and I went over this and actually showed you this website in the available resources, but here it is again, and it's got the website. You can go to that, and there are multiple chapters. Again, you can do this entire website in less than 30 minutes, and you should, okay? And you can see there is a short chapter for each of the 5 core propositions. Here's a graphic for the 5 core propositions, and you can see this is the architect of accomplished teaching. The 5 core propositions are embedded in the architect of accomplished teaching. And again, accomplished teaching is the level of National Board certification. So let's put everything in perspective. This is what you are going to do. You are going to get to know your students. Who are they? Where are they? What do you need in order to begin to meet their needs? Where is your starting point? Then you set high worthwhile goals. All of your components will ask you to identify goals. So you want to make sure that you work toward achieving that goal or moving your students toward that goal throughout your written commentary and your teaching. Then you implement instruction aligned to these goals. That's a big jump for a lot of teachers, because as teachers, we all know we have our lesson plan books from last year, we have our teacher manuals. However, you're going to have to stretch yourself a little bit and adapt the materials that you typically use to show more of knowledge of students to complete national boards. Then you evaluate. I like to say, think of that as formative assessment. And along with evaluating is reflecting what's working, what's not working. Then, of course, number 6, you just tweak your goals. Where do you go now? What do you do? So this is the heart of the 5 core propositions. But when you read it's called the What book, What Teachers Should Know and Be Able to Do. When you go, let's go back really quick to this website. You can also, you see here in red, you can download this as an ebook in English or Spanish. Make sure you download that and put that in the folder with your standards and read over that as well. That will be a great resource for you. This is an acronym that I helped to develop for my candidates because, well, number one, I use acronyms for everything, but I like to use this as an anchor chart for the National Board certification, specifically for components 2, 3, and 4. If you kind of lose your way and you feel overwhelmed and you lose sight of what you're really trying to do, come back to this anchor chart. And again, the 5 core propositions are embedded in this anchor chart. And remember, your standards align to one of the 5 core propositions. And this is available for you in WCTP 601. So, did you know the standards for each certificate are the sole basis for the assessment specifications that frame both the assessment center component and the portfolio components? This is taken specifically from the scoring guide. Your rubrics for each component align to the standards that are identified in that component, and your commentary questions are designed to prompt you to integrate and embody the standards. You can actually take those commentary questions and lay them right beside your rubric, and you will see that they go in a specific order. They all begin with knowledge of students. They lead into planning, instruction, environment, and all end with reflection. So you always want to have those 2 documents in front of you. Now let's talk a little bit about embodying the National Board standards, the accomplished teaching body of knowledge. And this is everything that we've been talking about, and it does have a name. It's called the Accomplished Teaching Body of Knowledge. It includes the 5 core propositions, which we said the architect of accomplished teacher connects to, as well as your standards. And when we talk about embodying, that means we are demonstrating evidence in our classroom that is connected to our standards. So let's elaborate a little bit on that. Whether you certify or not will depend upon whether you meet the standards identified in each component. When you see the word evidence in National Board certification, it is referring to evidence of your standards. And we at the World Class Teaching Program suggest that you meet each of the identified standards in at least 5 ways and at least 5 times. And that is just to get us to that clear, convincing level 4 rubric and consistent. So you have to meet them more than once, and you need to meet them in different ways. And again, the national board standards are not the state standards. We're referring to your certificate standards when we use the word standards. Another look, a little bit more about your standards. Each certificate area has 10 to 13 standards. Candidates are expected to still teach to their state's content standards and their certificate standards. Your components are scored against the certificate standards, not the state standards. Each component identifies the standards you should include, and the standards include examples of what accomplished teachers do. Accomplished teachers is code word for MBCTs. A little bit about how do the assessors use the standards. And again, this is in your scoring guide, pages 3 and 4. And of course, when we were discussing the resources, we highlighted the fact that you should download that document and be familiar with it before you begin the certification process. So it just tells you that the assessors evaluate and score your responses through the lens of the scoring rubrics, which are derived from the standards and made available to you in your component instructions. So again, they are judging you through the lens of the scoring guide. It is holistically, so they are looking at everything, and it is derived from the standards. So you want to make sure you know those standards prior to beginning to work on your portfolio entries. Also, when you are completing components 2, 3, and 4, you will be composing a written commentary. In WCTP 601, which all of our candidates are placed in, and if you are a national candidate, you would be in 602. It also includes this resource. There is a mini module called Writing for National Boards. Very significant. It includes a video of MBCTs who are writing project graduates that go into detail about what we're getting ready to talk about. There is a written commentary included in components 2, 3, and 4. Your writing and your submitted student work samples will be all your assessor has to see in your classroom. Your writing is the final hurdle between you and certification. You know, it's entirely possible that if the assessors could sit in your classroom and spend 3 or 4 weeks watching you do all of this teaching, that indeed you would model what an accomplished teacher does and certify, but that's not what they have to judge you by. All they have to judge you by will be your written commentary. So for that reason, we need to be very specific in how we go about doing things. And a little bit about writing for national boards. We write to describe, analyze, and reflect. And again, this is in that written commentary as well. And this is also in your general portfolio instructions. And this just shows you a little bit that when you are composing your written commentary, that you use descriptive writing to set up the situation. The bulk of your writing is all analytical, your thought process, why, how, and what ways. And then reflection, of course, comes at the end of every component, but is also embedded throughout your written commentary. At the heart of everything an accomplished teacher does is knowledge of students. Knowledge of students is everything in national boards. You will have to explain why you chose whatever instructional format or resources that you had, why you chose those specific activities, reading materials, why you did that mini lesson. You have to explain everything, and the reason should always come back to and be connected to your students. For example, if you chose to group your students in cooperative groups, why did you put them in cooperative groups? Why did you choose to do cooperative groups? So keep in mind, knowledge of students is absolutely everything in National Board Certification. Remember when we were talking about the helix, where we were looking at the 5 core propositions, the acronym that I was showing you? We were talking about aligning your instruction with your goals. Remember, I said that you can not just simply use what you used last year. You need to modify those resources based on your knowledge of students. So, and like we talked about we will talk about the way you begin everything is collecting data on those students. Okay, here's an example about standards in action. This is from the General Portfolio Instructions. In here you can see that these standards addressed our knowledge of students and diversity. And this first paragraph is actually the teacher dropping the language of the standards. And down below is an example of how she demonstrated those standards. And I'm just flashing this up here to make you aware that it's here. In the presentation Achieve, we will go really in depth about these resources and really analyze how she did this and what she is doing. Another resource for you to use will be Atlas. And the reason these resources are important for you is because they do model how a National Board certified teacher embodies their standards. So this is what it looks like in action. So you have your general portfolio instructions, and it's embedded in that. And then you also have the Atlas resource, which we talked about in available resources. And again, there is an account that you can get once you are a candidate. You have to register for the National Board, and again, having an ID number prior to doing this. But you just go here and you click on candidates, and then you'll fill out a form, and you'll get access to 4 cases in Atlas, where again you can analyze. You actually get to watch the video and then read the writing of an MBCT, so you can see how the standards were actively embedded in her lesson, and then you can see how the teacher wrote to describe those standards. So let's talk a little bit now. We've talked about why the standards are so significant. We've talked about some of the resources you have to help you see what it looks like. But prior to that, there are some activities that you can do, and people always ask me, well, what should I do first? I want to get started. How do I get started? Well, your beginning point should always be, after you've read the Guide to National Board Certification and developed a good understanding of what the process is your standards. You go to your standards. So we have provided a couple of activities that you can do to help you get to know your standards. The first one is standard organizers, and I'll drop one in the resource for here, but in the Google Classroom. But this is also embedded in our mini module on standards and rubrics in WCTP 601, our candidate support program for the World Class Teaching Program. But you take this sheet of paper, and what this does is it leads you through aligning your rubric with your standards. And here's an example of what it looks like. This is an early childhood generalist, and we actually did this in a face-to-face training where we opened up, this is an early childhood generalist component 3. So we opened up the component 3 instructions, and we identified the standards that the ECGN had to meet. And as a group, they worked together and they identified where those standards are on the rubric. And as you can see, they are in multiple places. All this sheet does is it allows you to transfer this onto here. You write the standards down, the aligned rubric bullets. You just find the significant parts from that, and then the keywords and phrases that come from your standards. Typically, that is the headings. And again, there's an explanation of how to do this in WCTP 601. What I really recommend you do this summer, prior to joining the program, or you're welcome to go ahead and join, but go ahead and outline your standards. You don't need a video or any specific instructions for this. You just open up your standards, and I always suggest you get a little composition notebook, simply because those pages do not tear out. If you get a spiral notebook, you will use this notebook a lot. Eventually your pages will tear or rip out. So just get a notebook and you will outline your standards in it. Print out your standards. You have to have a hard copy and an electronic copy of your standards. You can search the electronic copy because it's a PDF for specific things, but we want you to interact with the paper copy. We want you reading those standards, highlighting those standards, and as you are doing that, outline it in your notebook. So this is good for a couple of reasons, and I suggest you read about 1 standard a day. Your standards are anywhere from 90 to 100 pages. You will kill a couple of trees when you print them out. But if you chunk it and you read your standards just one a day, maybe two a day if you have time. The point is, you're not going to do this activity in one setting. The standards is too big of a document. So if you just set yourself up to do one standard a day, or even every other day if it's in the summer, uh, in no time you will have done a couple of things. Number one, you will have thoroughly read through your standards and interacted with your standards, okay? And I always encourage teachers to highlight things they do not already do. And keep in mind, your standards, like here you can see, is knowledge of the students. It's going to show you how accomplished teachers collect and embody knowledge of students in their classroom. And then when you put it in a notebook, well, it becomes a tactile activity. And just like our students, we all have different learning styles. And not only that, you have created a resource that you can use throughout your certification journey with your components. You can also do this electronically. Either way is fine. And this is just an example from Early Childhood Generalist, Standard 5. And you can see, rather than outlining it, this was an example of a Middle Childhood Generalist. That's actually my own personal standards notebook. Here you can see all they basically do the same thing, only they do it on a computer. Either way is perfectly fine. A lot of teachers do really like this because it's very easy to see, like selecting and using different assessments. Well, here are 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8 different ways and things you can do. So it's a little bit clearer and easier to see. But again, that is totally your choice. It's actually the same activity. It's just done in a different way. You can do your standards notebook, the old-fashioned way with paper and pencil and a notebook, or you can do it electronically, or you can do both, whatever suits you. But this is the activity that we recommend you do before you begin National Board certification, okay? Skipping it is a huge mistake. Again, your components are scored against your ability to integrate and embody the standards. So do not skip this. It is a very costly mistake. There is a common paradigm shift that you need to avoid, and we're about to wrap this training up, but I want to make you aware of this. When candidates begin their certification journey, their focus is on their standards, like yours are right now. But a couple of things happen. School happens, life happens. And then teachers are in the throe of teaching, so they open up that component that they're going to do, and they start reading the instructions, and they're like, okay, what do I have to do? Okay, I've got to teach this lesson. I've got to video that. So the focus shifts from the standards to what do I have to do? Then it makes another shift. It shifts from what do I have to do to composing the written commentary, or maybe I should say answering the questions. The standards take a back seat. They become an afterthought of composing the written commentary. You do not want to do this. You absolutely must plan with your standards in front of you. Consider it front loading, okay? If you are going to be embodying your standards, that has to take place during your teaching. It is too late to embody the standards in your writing if you didn't do that in your teaching, and you do not want to end up in that situation, okay? So you very clearly want to be mindful of how significant your standards are at the very beginning of this process. Remember, these standards for each certificate area are the sole basis for the assessment specifications that frame both the assessment center components and your portfolio components. And again, that is straight from the scoring rubric. Your rubrics align with the standards, and the commentary questions in each component are designed to prompt you opportunities to integrate and embed the standards. And again, after you have viewed the training for all of the components, you will see a presentation called Achieve, where we just don't talk about how to do this. We go down deep and we show you how to embody your standards. So make sure you pay very close attention to that presentation. Thank you.